Born into destitution, Nell Gwyn was akin to an R-rated Cinderella, ascending from poverty to become a celebrated actress, the cherished mistress of King Charles II, and ultimately an icon of the Restoration era. Yet even Nell's legendary witticisms and striking allure couldn't shield her from turbulence, scandal, and sorrow. Charles II, notorious for his numerous mistresses, occasionally found his infidelity mirrored. For instance, he once discovered one of Nell's rivals, Lady Castlemaine, in a compromising situation with the Duke of Marlborough. In stark contrast, Gwyn's relationship with Charles commenced when she was a mere 17, and she remained devoted to him, not only until his demise but even beyond. Nell was undeniably striking, boasting chestnut hair, light hazel eyes, and a radiant grin. Diverging from the curvaceous figures favored by Restoration beauty standards, Gwyn was petite, albeit shapely, and particularly renowned for her diminutive feet. However, her appeal to men extended beyond mere physical attributes. Nell possessed additional charms. Numerous portraits of the actress-turned-mistress accentuate her pert bosom, with some depicting Nell in all her ample glory. When Nell was still an infant, tragedy struck. Her father, unable to settle his debts, was imprisoned in a debtor's jail, where he ultimately perished. This left Nell, her mother, and her elder sister Rose in dire straits. Respectable employment was scarce for women in the 17th century, so her mother resorted to the world's oldest profession, selling her body to sustain her daughters. Nell toiled in various menial jobs as a child in the London slums, from peddling fruit on the streets to serving liquor at her mother's brothel. Nell labored diligently, but certain historians suggest she held a position so scandalous that even Bawdy Nell herself wouldn't acknowledge it. Nell and her sister Rose may have augmented their income by engaging in sex work. When her rival mistress, Barbara Palmer, ostentatiously displayed her new, extravagant carriage, Nell conceived a cunning scheme to mock her newfound heirs. She rode to Palmer's estate in a crude cart drawn by 6 oxen. As she circled the building, Nell exclaimed, "Way, high to market!" Her message was unmistakable. Barbara could embellish appearances as much as she pleased, but ultimately they were both mistresses. Palmer ceased to bother Gwyn thereafter. As children, Nell and her sister Rose worked as orange vendors at a theater, selling fruit to the audience. While employed there, Nell rapidly became the mistress of the theater's leading man, Charles Hart. Befriending the principal actor had its advantages. Less than a year later, Gwyn joined the ranks of England's pioneering public actresses in 1665. Among all of King Charles II of England's mistresses, Nell Gwyn was the most cherished by the common populace. Her moniker, Pretty Witty Nell, originated not from her time with Charles but from her years as a beloved comedic performer. Londoners delighted in seeing Nell portray sassy heroines in comedies and romances. Nell may have gravitated towards comedic roles because she possessed a genuinely hilarious disposition. For example, when her paramour, King Charles II, became stressed by the financial demands of his numerous mistresses, he sought Nell's counsel. Her response was truly iconic. "Lock up your codpiece, or in modern parlance, keep it in your pants, my man." Long before they ever crossed paths, Gwyn's future royal lover, King Charles, paved the way for her career. Upon his restoration to the throne in 1660, Charles II became a significant patron of the dramatic arts and even legalized female actors on stage. This movement enabled unconventional women like Nell to flourish in public life. However, Charles II wasn't Gwyn's first aristocratic benefactor. In 1667, Gwyn commenced an affair with Charles Sackville. Sackville was quite a catch. Cultured, witty, satirical, debauched, and utterly captivating. His arguably most alluring trait, however, was that he housed Gwyn and provided her with an allowance of $100, enabling her to temporarily retire from acting at least. By the summer of 1667, Gwyn's idyllic period had officially concluded, and she was once again in dire straits. Her initial sugar daddy, Lord Buckhurst, had discarded her. Her boss, Charles Hart, was incensed at her desertion, and worst of all, she was penniless. It would require a royal intervention to lift her spirits. Little did she know, royal salvation was imminent. In late 1667, the Duke of Buckingham grew weary of how Charles II's favored mistress, Barbara Palmer, persistently swayed the king to adopt her political agenda. Resolved to supplant her from power, Buckingham commenced searching for a new, alluring rival to capture the king's affections. Actresses, then the sought-after women of the era, were the most eligible candidates. Buckingham approached Nell, but her response left him speechless. Nell astounded Buckingham by promptly demanding $500 annually in exchange for her services as the king's new mistress. Taken aback by Nell's exorbitant price, Buckingham stated he would consider it and swiftly offered the position to Moll Davis, coincidentally Gwyn's acting rival. According to lampoons from the period, Gwyn outmaneuvered her rival through an ingenious, albeit childish tactic. She purportedly slipped laxatives into Davis's beverage just before Davis was scheduled to attend to King Charles. This tale is more folklore than documented history, but it remains highly entertaining. Gwyn maintained a close friendship with Aphra Behn, one of the first professional female writers in English history. Indeed, accounts from the time suggest that Behn assisted Gwyn in administering those handy-dandy laxatives to Davis. Folklore suggests Gwyn footed the bill on her inaugural date with King Charles II. The pair met in adjoining theater boxes, where Charles displayed greater interest in the captivating Nell than the performance on stage. The king invited Nell to dinner afterward, accompanied by his brother, the Duke of York. When the time arrived to settle the bill, His Majesty and his royal brother discovered they had no cash on them. Nell covered the expense and exclaimed, in an imitation of the king's voice and catchphrase, "Odds fish, but this is the poorest company I was ever in." Nell may not have received $500 from Buckingham, but Charles II held a different perspective. Compared to the exorbitant demands of his other mistresses, $500 was peanuts. He promptly granted Nell an enormous annual income of $4,000, which later escalated to an astounding $9,000. Nell was amassing a fortune, but the good times were not destined to endure. On May 8, 1670, Nell gave birth to her first son, Charles, the illegitimate offspring of King Charles II. Of course, for Charles, this wasn't particularly significant. Little Charles was his seventh son from over 5 different women. Even within the dog-eat-dog world of London theater, Nell was a megastar. As a testament to her influence, after she gave birth to little Charles, a stage company waited for months until she was finally prepared to appear in their production. She was worth the wait. Her performance in The Conquest of Granada by the Spaniards would be her final play ever. Thereafter, Gwyn departed the stage for the court, but not for a joyous reason. By 1671, Nell was back at court full-time for a somber cause. After years as Charles II's favored mistress, she finally faced competition. High-born and refined Louise de Querouaille was the antithesis of eccentric, jovial Gwyn. The cutthroat French court should have prepared Louise for some backstabbing antics, but Gwyn elevated it to an art form. Nell was not about to relinquish her man without a fight. Unlike the king's hoity-toity, high-born mistresses, Nell could drink, swear, and effortlessly dismantle her well-bred rivals. When the king became infatuated with Louise, Nell mangled her surname into Cartwheel. After a life of hardship, Nell Gwyn's mother did not experience a happy ending. She descended into hopeless alcoholism even after her daughter had risen to near royal status. Nell attempted to aid her mother's recovery, even placing her in a fine estate. But it was too late. After becoming severely intoxicated, she drowned near her residence in 1679. Nell never ceased trying to assist her beloved mother, Helena, even after her passing. At Helena's funeral, Nell reportedly spared no expense. She opted for an ostentatious velvet-lined coffin and even bid farewell to her mother in Helena's preferred manner, with copious amounts of liquor. Nell provided the mourners with a butt-ton of whiskey so they could toast Helena into the afterlife. Charles II was a notoriously lustful king. He possessed multiple topless paintings of Nell, concealed behind serene landscapes. Nell, conversely, displayed a nude portrait of herself prominently in her hallway for all guests to admire. The English court was a hotbed of triviality, but few exchanges rivaled the acrimonious sparring between Louise and Gwyn. For example, when Louise became an official duchess, she rubbed Gwyn's nose in her achievement. She persistently insulted Nell by subtly aggressively referencing Nell's humble origins. This day was no different. Louise smirked that Nell possessed such common garments that she could be a queen. Nell retorted with her customary directness, stating, "And you, Cartwheel, look whorish enough to be a duchess." Nell's elder sister, Rose, demonstrated that the mischief-making streak ran deep in the Gwyn family. Rose married a professional thief and even served jail time for theft herself. Even so, Nell never forgot her roots. She consistently looked out for her sister, ensuring the king provided Rose with an income so she wouldn't be compelled to steal again. You did not want to incur Nell's wrath, as she would exert every effort to publicly shame you. She particularly detested how Louise would feign connections to European nobles, asserting tenuous links to some duke or duchess. So one day when Louise swept into court clad in full mourning attire for a French prince she barely knew, Nell finally reached her limit. The following day, Nell mocked Louise for being ostentatious and insincere. She marched into the main courtroom entirely in black, proclaiming she was mourning the charm of Tartary. When a courtier inquired how Nell knew the charm, her response was absolutely scathing. She stated she knew him about as well as Louise knew the French prince, or in other words, not at all. Louise was incensed with Nell. For Louise, this was the final straw. On December 21st, 1676, Gwyn's first son, Charles, finally received a title befitting his station as a king's illegitimate son. One day, King Charles II came to visit Gwyn when she summoned their offspring with, "Come here, you little bastard, and say hello to your father." Aghast, the king questioned Gwyn why she would address her own child with such a term. She tartly replied, "Your Majesty has given me no other name by which to call him," and thus Charles bestowed upon his son a proper title, the Earl of Burford. Nell was somewhat known as the cool girl within Charles II's harem of mistresses. While her highborn rivals would demand Charles pay them more and acquire more lavish residences, Nell remained unconcerned. She simply desired to have a good time. So why was she so intent on securing a title for her son? The reason was straightforward, old-fashioned jealousy. The son of Gwyn's primary rival, the pretentious Louise. In February 1671, the king relocated Gwyn to a luxurious brick townhouse in the fashionable district of Pall Mall. But by this point, renting wasn't sufficient for Nell. Although she had carte blanche over the house, Gwyn insisted she needed to own it to feel truly independent. Charles, being so enamored, yielded to her demands. In 1676, Nell moved in permanently. Nell believed she could rest on her laurels now that she had outdone her rival Louise. But just as she caught her breath, another competitor entered the court. Hortense Mancini. Hortense, a Roman beauty, runaway duchess, and all-around force to be reckoned with, was the one person capable. But all of Nell's careful scheming was in vain. Hortense was untamed and uncontrollable. Astonishingly, not only did she embark on an affair with the dashing Prince of Monaco, but Hortense also slept with Anne Leonard, Charles II's illegitimate daughter, and then another royal on the side. When Charles II discovered all of Hortense's transgressions, he requested that Hortense get the heck out of his palace. With that, Nell was once again at the top of the king's list. Unlike Hortense, Nell only had eyes for Charles II. When an aspiring admirer attempted to woo her, Gwyn rebuffed him with a scathing rebuke. Taken aback, she declared she was far beyond his reach, comparing herself to a beautiful deer and her suitor to an ugly dog. In 1671, Gwyn gave birth to her second illegitimate royal son, James. He was named after Charles II's younger brother, but don't assume this signified Nell's fondness for him. She was a proud Protestant who enjoyed merriment, while James was a staunch Catholic obsessed with doom and gloom. Despite his royal namesake, Nell's son James was not shielded from tragedy. While abroad in Paris, James tragically died from unknown causes, linked to a leg ailment at just 10 years old. Devastated, Nell raved that Louise had somehow poisoned her son, and that's not the sole dark aspect of his passing. When Nell learned of her young son's death, she succumbed to profound grief. But over time, her sorrow transformed into a deep sense of guilt. Because Nell had permitted James to travel abroad, she blamed herself for her young son's demise. After Charles II's death, Nell could have been consigned to debtor's prison like her impoverished father. Thankfully, that did not transpire. But with the king's passing, Nell lost more than just a lover. Before his demise, she was slated to be made Countess of Greenwich and finally receive a noble title. After Charles died, that opportunity vanished. She would remain merely Nell Gwyn for the remainder of her days. Gwyn suffered a debilitating stroke in March 1687, paralyzing her vivacious spirit on one side of her body. Just months later, she endured another stroke that left her completely incapacitated at the age of just 37. Gwyn passed away on November 17, 1687. Scholars believe that the man who defined her life also caused her death, even from beyond the grave. Throughout her time as Charles II's mistress, Nell somehow avoided contracting any of his numerous STDs, but when she suffered her violent strokes, Doctors attributed the cause directly to Charles II's womanizing ways. Nell likely had advanced syphilis, contracted from her one and only love. Even though she held a profession of questionable repute, the people of England revered Nell Gwyn. An enormous crowd attended her funeral, and the nation mourned their beloved pauper to princess mistress. She was a courtesan, but Nell was consistently kind to the impoverished, devoted to King Charles II, and never forgot her humble origins. She was the people's darling, and they adored her for it. Remember how Gwyn secured a noble title for her son by calling him a bastard? Well, there's an alternate, more dramatic version of that tale. In this version, she holds baby Charles out a window and threatens to drop him unless King Charles ennobles their son spur of the moment. Instinctively, King Charles exclaimed, "God save the Earl of Burford," and I suppose they proceeded with that. Nell Gwyn's life was anything but ordinary. From the dusty stages of London's theaters to the gilded halls of Whitehall Palace, her journey tells the story of a woman who defied the odds with charm, wit, and resilience. In a time when women had little power, Nell carved out a place for herself not just in the king's court, but in the hearts of the people. She was adored not only because she was beautiful or clever, but because she was real, never pretending to be someone she wasn't. Despite being the mistress of one of the most powerful men in the world, she remained grounded, often using her position to help others and protect those she loved. Her famous plea, "Let not poor Nellie starve," may sound simple, but it echoed a truth, that behind the glamour and gossip was a woman who never forgot where she came from. Nell Gwyn's legacy isn't one of scandal, but of survival and spirit. She showed that dignity could exist even in the most undignified roles, and that laughter could be a kind of rebellion. Today, she's remembered not as just a royal mistress, but as a symbol of how far wit, courage, and authenticity can take you, even in a world that wants to write you off.